Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues joining us by Zoom today, welcome to the Maohi Roundtable on the nuclear facts in French Polynesia. Bienvenue à cette table ronde sur le fait nucléaire en Polynésie française, aujourd'hui co-présidée par Oscar Temaru, le président du Tavini Huira'atira, ancien président du pays, et un comité organisateur qui comprend essentiellement les deux associations de défense des victimes et des vétérans du nucléaire, l'Église protestante Maohi qui va nous rejoindre et un certain nombre de participants que je vais vous présenter maintenant. Je vais personnellement agir en tant que coordinateur modérateur. Mon nom est Michel Villard. À ma droite, vous reconnaîtrez le président Oscar Temaru. À ma gauche, Anthony Géros, président du groupe Tavini Huira'atira à l'Assemblée. Et Thea Hirschon, la première présidente de la première commission d'enquête sur les conséquences des nucléaires en Polynésie de l'année 2005. Ensuite, à ma droite, je vous présente Richard Tuheyava, représentant à l'Assemblée de Polynésie, ancien sénateur de la République française. Le siège vide sera bientôt rejoint par le représentant de l'Église protestante et le représentant de l'association Huira'atira, une des deux associations des vétérans du nucléaire. Gilles Parzi, qui est un expert en biologie et en agrobiologie. À ma gauche, je vous présente le père Webe Carlson de l'association 193, son président, suivi de Eliane Tevahitua, représentante à l'Assemblée de Polynésie, frère Maxime Chan de la Fédération des associations de protection de l'environnement, et participe également Vanina Krolla, secrétaire général du parti, et je suis aidé dans la traduction par mon collègue Roland Bopp. For the international participants, may I introduce not as international person, but Moetai Brotherson, who is in Paris, député à l'Assemblée nationale, Nick McLellan, investigative journalist on nuclear issues in the Pacific, le professeur Vijay Naidu from the University of the South Pacific based in Fiji, Maureen Pendrelli from PANG, coordinator for the Pacific Island Network on Globalization, Stephanie Mills, journalist and director of campaign, mainly involved in education, Professor Janik Radon from Columbia University, School of Public International Affairs, Ena Manuireva, who is joining us from Auckland University of Technology. I guess I have not forgotten anybody. Would you please signal yourself if somebody else has joined the Zoom? I would like, before I give the floor to the participants, just recall that this roundtable is followed live on Facebook, that there is no immediate translation and that will go from English to French depending on the context of the discussion. Please raise your hand when you wish to take the floor and I will manage to give you the floor. Just for the benefit of our internet followers, I will now just read you what we have decided to be the reference definition on the nuclear fact. Je vais rapidement indiquer la définition que nous avons adoptée en commun de ce que l'on appelle le fait nucléaire, pour que l'ensemble des participants sachent de quoi on parle exactement, et ensuite nous allons directement entamer les débats. Nous avons défini le fait nucléaire en Polynésie française comme la mise en place d'une organisation civile et militaire qui a supplanté par nature les autorités et l'administration locale. Cette organisation a perpétré 193 essais atomiques entre 66 et 96. L'impact et les conséquences environnementales et sanitaires exactes de ces essais n'ont jamais été pleinement évalués et reconnus par la puissance administrante. Il a fallu plus de 60 ans pour mieux préciser les impacts de ces conséquences environnementales et sanitaires, ainsi que l'ampleur des maladies radio-induites transgénérationnelles et pour discuter de l'indemnisation des victimes du nucléaire. For our international guests, please note that this consensual definition of the nuclear facts is enclosed within the synopsis of the conference, which was handed over to you. I will now precise the background of this roundtable, which is the political response to the roundtable currently being held in Paris. And I will give the floor successively to President Temaru, to Maohi Brotherson, and to Thea Hirschen, who will precise the framework of the table, this round table, and especially tell us why we are holding this round table in Paris now, and how do we conceive this political response to the round table in Paris. And I guess that Maohi Brotherson will be in the position to give us some feedback of the current first day of the round table, which has happened in Paris today, July the 1st. Mr. President, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. A special kia ora to Stephanie. I'm still waiting our next trip to Moruroa. This is a roundtable organized in, I should say, that's a reality, French-occupied Polynesia. And nobody has the upper hand around this table. Everybody is free to talk about what he wants to talk about. But the one in Paris is under the upper hands of the King of France, who is Mr. Macron. You know, France is a monarchy. There's election and election is the president of the French Republic. So that's why I call this meeting in Paris a vertical table. You know, the king will speak and everybody will say, yeah. So this one is free. And I would like to say, just to remind to everyone, France has decided to use our country for the French nuclear testing after the accession to independence of Algeria. That was in 1962. You know, there was rumors in France to organize it maybe in the Massif Central or in Corsica or maybe in Bretagne, but it won't work because if they decided to, that there will be revolution in France. And they decided to come down here, you know, in our beautiful country. Maybe I am one of the first people who went to Moruroa. That was in 1964, before the first nuclear testing. Mururu and Whangatau was two beautiful places for holidays, you know, and now it's erased from the world map, with all the consequences about health problems, economical problems, and political problems. That is the real situation in this country. You also have to know, since 1977, we have a kind of internal autonomy. It's not self-determination, but internal autonomy that has been amended, I don't know how many times, but the main label, the main power is, you know, in the hands of the French state. So that's why Paris is not the right place to talk about the problem we are facing in our country. Since the beginning, you know, the association Huira'atira was created in 1995, I think. And since that time, I told to everyone, we are on the wrong track, you know, because in that case, France is judge and party. That's not fair. We will never have, you know, a fair discussion and fair conversation. The right place to go is the International Court of Justice in La Haye. So that's what we did, you know. Our country was reinscribed on the list of the United Nations in 2013, May the 17th. And October the 2nd, we went to La Haye to, it's called a communication. That's the first step. And now everybody in this country is free to sue the French government before the International Court of Justice. That's the situation for the moment. Just to introduce this meeting, and I would like to thank you to every participant to this meeting. This is an international, you know, meeting. The one in Paris is between French and, you know, the king of France and the slaves of France. This is an international meeting with free people from all around the world. So thank you to you all.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Avant de donner la parole au député Maohi Brotherson, je voudrais recognize Carlyle Corbin, our representative, Dr. Carlyle Corbin, who joined us via Zoom from New York. Maohi Brotherson, you have the floor. You are in Paris, and it's my understanding that today has been achieved the first day of the so-called roundtable organized by President Macron, I think in Matignon. And what is your feeling about this, the outcome of this first day? Do you foresee any positive outcome? And what would be your suggestion to go ahead, considering that you lately tabled a very interesting legislative proposition in the National Assembly, which was unfortunately rebuked by the French Parliament, and what would be the steps ahead according to your experience? Thank you.
Well, first of all, Your Honor, everyone, it's been a long day here in Paris, and it's been a few long weeks since I arrived on June 3rd. As you recalled, I had a law proposal that tried to encompass the main requests from both the victims, the associations, our security, social security system, and I did work for 2 years on this law proposal that was presented on June 17th, and of course that was dismissed by the majority here. Arguing, one of the arguments was, of course, the occurring of this high-level, so-called high-level roundtable that was summoned by Jupiter himself, President Macron. And well, this roundtable did happen today. We've seen some Polynesian representatives participating in this roundtable. I would say that the most relevant representatives were, of course, not there, because Morulo Etato was not there, 193 was not there, the Tavini was not there, the Huira'atira was not there per se, and I would also mention Huira'atira, that was also a political party very active, and also Yamanate Nuna. They were not requested or invited to that high-level roundtable, nor were the journalists and the scientists that work on the disclose case that led to the toxic book. They were not invited. So it was what the French called a very, practical entre-soi. So they only had very, I would say, handpicked people, very willingly participating in what cannot be called other than, a farce. First of all, if you recall, when Mr. Le Cornu was in Tahiti, and when the premises of this high-level roundtable were laid, he told everyone in French Polynesia that this would be about being transparent. This would be a sincere exercise. The first question that comes to mind is, if transparency was the goal, why was this meeting totally private and no one from the press was allowed inside? Only when the meeting was over, to take nice pictures, nice photographs, and outside the room to interview the French ministers. So there was no transparency. Transparency is not a word that applies to the case of the nuclear testings in France. I was specifically shocked by declarations made by Geneviève Dariussec, who is the Minister of Memory. I didn't even know that there was a Minister of Memory who was in charge of memory in France, but there is. And so she was the minister in charge of, this first day of the roundtable. And she basically told the journalists in a very, very, very serious tone that there has not been any lie from the French state pertaining to the nuclear testings. So that was the first declaration from Mrs. Dariussec. And she reiterated that there wouldn't be any, I would say, requests for forgiveness from the French state, because they didn't lie, so they don't need to ask the Polynesian people for forgiveness. So if this was the main result of the first day, I cannot be optimistic about the outcome of tomorrow. I think it's going to be even worse. We are witnessing a total reverse, a total rewriting of the history about the nuclear testings. We are basically, the French state is trying to get us back to the times of this policy of clean nuclear testings. So I was a little bit torn apart in the previous weeks, because part of me doesn't like the policy of the empty chair. And I felt at one point compelled to go, at least to be a direct witness of what was happening behind closed doors. But when I see what has happened today, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that I didn't partake in this, farce, in this total lack of respect to the Polynesian people, to the victims of the nuclear test. So that's maybe the first few words that I can share with you, and maybe I'll come back later on if we have questions, or if I have questions. Maruru.
Thank you, Maohi. Thank you for your contribution. Unfortunately, we can notice that the state lie is still on, and that there is a spirit of no excuse. So we will have to go from there. I will give the floor to Thea Hirschon, who was the colleague who presides over the first inquiry on the consequences of nuclear testing in French Polynesia in 2005, if I am correct. Thank you, Thea.
Thank you. Kia ora, everybody. And a special kia ora to Stephanie Mills and Nick McNellan, who has supported, given us so much help during the whole time we were protesting, marching on the streets, protesting on the boats, etc. So thank you. Special thanks to you too. Yes, so in 2005, there was a big change in government. We had elections, and there was a movement, I think a big popular movement, who wanted to change the politics that had been practiced by all the past 30 years with Mr. Gaston Floss at the head. So the movement was called the Tawi, and which means change. We won the elections, and a few weeks after, I was given the opportunity to preside the special committee on the consequences of nuclear testing. I would say it was the first part. It was nuclear testing in the atmosphere. We had, I think, more than 90 tests in the atmosphere, I think. And
they didn't let us time to change all that.
Yes.
After 6 months, our government was overthrown.
Yes, yes.
Has to be precise.
Yes.
By the French government.
So, because this inquiry at Parliament was within the law, it was very hard for the French government and the authorities to prevent it from, asking people to testify, whether they were local people involved into that time, whether it was people from the weather department, whether it was, I would say, scientists or specialists. So, but the pressure was very tough, but because it was within the law, they couldn't avoid it. So Tawi means change, and somehow the climate was good for this inquiry because people felt safe to testify. So local people who had an important role during the times of the testing, who knew a lot of things, but because but people were scared. There was like a cloud of you don't talk, and now it was the Tawi. So we had a lot of interesting testimonies, which are part of this report, and which gave us the opportunity to, how would I say, to give proofs that there has been damage to the population, damage to the environment. And we had a lot of people who came to our office at Parliament to tell their stories. And so all this was put into this report. The French authorities at some point sent a delegation from Paris with Mr. de la Gravière to head it. You remember him?
Yes, I do.
And he came with about 5 people, some of them were scientists, etc., to try to counter us and to tell us that we were exaggerating, that it wasn't that dangerous, etc., that they would give some information, etc., etc. And I had the special advisor for this committee, which was Bruno Barillot, you know, who spent all his life gathering information on nuclear testing. So by law, it had to end within a 6-month period. And we had you know, the plan was to continue after. Unfortunately, there was an overturn in our government. It was a period of instability and with people going from one camp to the other, and we lost the elections. But I would say the important thing is that it really opened the doors for people to be able to testify, to speak, and not to be threatened by the authorities or, you know. I think I will stop there because give my turn.
Thank you to the people who wrote this book.
Yes, and you know, this book, Toxic, tells the story too of what happened. But today, a new book came out by Jean-Marc Regnault, and in his interview today, he said that this round table in Paris, we shouldn't expect anything. Macron is going to give a few candies, but nothing much. The importance for France is to be an actor in the Pacific Ocean with America, with Australia and New Zealand to counter the Chinese presence in the Pacific. This is what France wants here. So it's going to be a hard battle for us.
The new geopolitics.
Yeah, new geopolitics. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Thea. As far as we go to the discussion, we realized that the issue of the Fait, of the nuclear fact, leads us to sometimes some geopolitical major issues, and this roundtable is really a challenge. As you said, Thea, the value of testimonies and addition of testimonies over testimonies might be a key for us to consider. And I'm just thinking of what happened in South Africa when after the apartheid, in order to cool down the major issue this country was experiencing, they established a kind of commission. It was called Truth and Justice and Reconciliation Commission throughout the country. Nothing in South Africa to solve the problem happened in the former colonized capitals. Nothing happened in London. Nothing happened in Holland. Nothing happened in Belgium. Everything happened on the soil of South Africa. And maybe we should consider this kind of testimony commission to add up testimonies of the people against this political lie and situation de déni. We are now embarking in the core of the discussion, which is the paragraph 4 of the synopsis for our friends and colleagues who have the document handed over to them, which addresses especially the impact and consequences of the nuclear fact. And there are two major impacts. One is the sanitary impact, and the other one is the environmental impact. Dealing with the sanitary impact, we all know the costs and the various costs which this nuclear fact is imposing on the, for example, the health structure. This is one point of the issue. The second point of the issue, and maybe the major one, is the compensation to victims. How do we tackle this issue and how to compensate? This is the question I wish to raise and give the floor now. I suggest that Père Webe from the Association 193 give us his point of view. Je suggère que Père Webe Carlson nous donne son point de vue sur les conséquences des essais nucléaires, les impacts sanitaires du fait nucléaire sur les populations, la problématique de l'indemnisation des populations, le fait que le rapport toxique, mais on le savait déjà, a notamment mis en avant les carences du système actuel mis en place par la loi Morin, qui est arrivée à bout de souffle et qui a donné très peu de résultats. Et vous rappellerez les chiffres d'indemnisation, ça se compte sur les doigts de la main ou presque. Ensuite, je voudrais donner la parole, après Père Webe, à Richard Touheyava, qui a une position très nette sur ce sujet. Et ensuite, je donnerai la parole à certains de nos collègues en Zoom, notamment le professeur Janik Radon de l'Université de Columbia et Nick McLellan, dans un premier temps. Je crois reconnaître aussi qui vient de nous rejoindre Vanessa Griffin from Fiji, who is a member of the PANG network. But you are based in Sydney now, I think. Père Webe, you have the floor. You can express yourself in French or in English, and we will have a translation with my colleague Roland. Thank you.
Maruru ina tatou ina ko l'association 193 a participé aux réunions de préparation en vue de la table ronde Recotica, en gardant une grande liberté de décision. Et il y a 3 semaines, nous avons décliné officiellement l'invitation sur une raison principale, à partir d'une raison principale. Les membres de Recotica participent à ce que nous considérons comme un négationnisme systémique. Et cela se vérifie dans les débats des uns et des autres et de certains universitaires même. Je prends l'exemple de 3 universitaires de la Polynésie française qui sont venus nous parler de l'impact économique. Ils n'ont développé leur position que par rapport aux avantages, entre guillemets, que le pays a bénéficié. Et à la question de 193 sur ces essais nucléaires, qu'est-ce qu'ils ont rapporté à l'État français hier, aujourd'hui et demain, aucun des professeurs n'a réussi à répondre et n'a voulu répondre à cette question. Et donc, nous nous apercevons que c'est une délégation profondément marquée par un système qui encourage le négationnisme. Et cela nourrit par un autre syndrome, celui de Stockholm, presque comme une pitié où il faut toujours mettre le doute du côté des victimes, jamais dans les propos de l'État. Voilà notre profonde raison pour ne pas avoir cautionné ce déplacement. Et à juste titre, lorsque, pas plus tard qu'hier, le président Fritsch décore M. Alain Krishnat d'une médaille de, je ne sais plus quelle médaille, commandeur, c'est un des principaux responsables des refus de tous les dossiers des victimes liées aux essais nucléaires. Et donc, comment voulez-vous croire à une entreprise de Recotica lorsqu'on commence à décorer ceux-là même qui à chaque fois protège les victimes, protège l'État au détriment des victimes. Ça, c'était mon introduction. Donc, à la question de Michel concernant les victimes, à l'association 193, nous accompagnons surtout les victimes que nous considérons comme les oubliées. Pendant trop longtemps, les victimes ont surtout été ceux parmi nos parents, nos grands-parents qui ont été travaillés sur les sites du nucléaire. Or, à 193, nous voyons qu'il y a un oublié dans cette histoire. Et ces oubliés, ce sont toutes les populations de toutes nos îles et de tous les archipels. Et donc, nous apportons notre voix pour essayer de faire entendre leur silence, leur souffrance, leur colère. Et à ce niveau-là, nous avons remarqué que tous les dossiers rejetés, donc déclarés défavorables par le CIVEN, le sont à partir d'une seule mesure défendue par la sénatrice Lana Tetuanui. C'est le fameux 1 millisivert. Et ce fameux 1 millisivert est étonnamment lié aux données du CEA. Or, aujourd'hui, les données du CEA sont bloquées. Et donc, ils défendent l'avis comme quoi ces victimes ne sont pas des vraies victimes à partir des archives non déclassifiées du CEA. Et lorsque nous entendons, comme Moetaï rappelé, l'intervention de la ministre déléguée des armées dire que peut-être on ira sur un chemin d'ouverture, nous avons beaucoup de raisons de douter vis-à-vis de ces propos. En tous les cas, les victimes que nous accompagnons à 193 depuis 3 ans uniquement, elles sont un peu plus de 300 à 400 victimes que nous accompagnons depuis 3 ans. Tous les refus sont justifiés à partir des données du CEA. Et à partir de ce moment-là, il n'y a quasiment aucun recours, si ce n'est parfois d'aller dans le circuit judiciaire. Mais en face, nous avons un CIVEN qui défend notamment l'État et au service de l'État. Un organisme qui n'est pas indépendant et qui est relayé sur le territoire par le comité médical de suivi que nous avons toujours dit c'était un comité militaire de surveillance ici dans notre pays. Et donc ce CMS, le comité médical de suivi, fait une propagande continuelle contre les associations telles que Moruro et Tato et 193. Donc, il y a réellement un négationnisme systémique qui accompagne la difficulté de prendre au sérieux la parole des victimes. Voilà comme première intervention je voudrais faire ce matin. En tout cas, un grand merci à tous. Maruru Maitai.
Merci. Je vais passer la parole à Roland qui va faire une traduction synthétique rapide. I would like also to recognize on the floor of the international guest, Mr. Thomas Statius, who is the author of the Toxic book. Thomas, welcome and thank you so much for joining virtually French Polynesia. And again, thank you for the overwhelming work you did with the production of the Toxic report. And if I may say so, you are one of the reasons why those 2 roundtables happen to take place either in Paris and either in Papeete. I will give you the floor in a few minutes, but thank you again for joining us and congratulations. Roland.
In few words, this is what Mr. Webe Carlson shared with you a few minutes ago. The main reason why Association 193 didn't participate to this roundtable in France is mainly because French state sticks on the on they don't want to accept that the impacts of nuclear tests on the population of Polynesian population and on this country. The second reason is that the victims of these nuclear tests are not receiving compensation from French state because the organizations who agree or give this compensation is run by French state. These are the two main reasons why Association 193 do not participate to this roundtable in Paris, France. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will give the floor to Richard, who will present us his point of view, and then I will give the floor to some of our international colleagues, Nick McClellan and Thomas Statius. Richard, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. First of all, for those who are here, I just would like to say thank you for your presence, each of us, and commend the presence of some former representative of the Assembly, and also the president of our party, Tavini Huira'atira, and some members. Our speaker of the group within the Assembly, Tony Giros, and one of the two pillars of the civilians' fight for the recognitions of the victims' right as regards to the nuclear testings, the Association 193. But also, I would like to say hi to some good friends online at the moment. I'm talking about Carlisle Corbyn. I would like to greet him, as well as Maureen Panjueli, and I know a little bit too. And a special apologize to to Anna. I was very, very busy over the last few weeks, and I was waiting actually for this roundtable to occur before my interview to give. So also to Dr. Jenny Redden, my greetings too, and one person that I heard a lot about, which is Nick McClellan, and read a lot about. Thank you for your presence amongst us today. I have only two major points today regarding the item of our agenda, paragraph 2. My first point is really targeting the French lie. It's a lie. I think it's very important to also recognize that if we were taking this meeting 30 years ago, we've been considered as terrorists. And now it's a good thing that we're now allowed to speak about. And because the argument that I wanted to put on the table today is about that lie.
Pack of lies.
It was a lie, clearly a lie. Former and dear beloved friend Bruno Barrio actually transmitted an official report coming from the United States Department of Defense, dated 1977. It was the 3rd edition, which means that the first edition was probably 10 years ago, before the French testings starting in French Polynesia, in Maohi Nui. It was the 3rd edition, and that 3rd edition actually was translated by the French Center of Atomic Researches in 1963. And what was the title of that report from the United States? The effects of nuclear weapons. Les effets des armes nucléaires. And everything was actually explained in the in the American report with regards to the effect on the human beings. And I think actually this was translated clearly because we have the two documents that former friends Bruno Barrio transmitted to us. We have the full documents, the two reports, one in American, 1977, and one translated a few years ago in 1963, before the first French testing in Maohi Nui. Remember, the first test was the 2nd of July, 1966. So the French knew all about the effects of nuclear weapons on the human body. And everything actually was translated. And we also know that regarding, if we review these two documents, all the diseases that we are facing now were already knew by General de Gaulle and by the Committee of Defense of that period. It was before also the referendum of the Fifth Republic Constitution to take place in our country. And we know, or most of all know, what happened to one of the leaders of that period, which was Puvana'opa. Of course, there is no clear relation, historical relation between the center and the nuclear testings and Puvana'opa, which is not the item of today, of debate of today, but everything was orchestrated clearly from France at the same place that the round table is taking place today, almost 50 years ago. So that's very important for us to know that those who are saying that French did not lie today are lying. This is clear. And I wanted to highlight that point really to push the rights of the victims. And the second point I wanted to put on the table of today was that France already integrated its position of regards to the nuclear testing, with regards to the nuclear testing in its own geostrategic policy in the ocean, in Pacific Ocean. And as far as and as long as it was only a political matter or a scientific matter, they did not move. When the rights of the victim started to be put on the international table back in 2001 and back in 2008, when the first French proposals of law was submitted at the Senate or the National Assembly in France, then France started to change its position. It means that it's very important that the victims' rights are to be addressed in this fight too, and not only on a scientific, on a political issue. And I'm very happy, and I'm so happy and glad to see that now the cause, the struggle of the victims are now put it at the forefront of that fight, even at a higher level. And this is my final words. It has to be also addressed before the International Penal Court of The Hague as crimes against humanity, penal violations. That's my major points. With my second point. Thank you very much, and I give back the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to President Temaru, and then I will call upon the Professor Jenik Radon from Columbia University, because I know, Jenik, that you have to leave soon the Zoom conference for other obligations. Thank you.
I'll be very short. The testing. We had information from people from Bikini Islands, from the Marshall Islands, and from the Japanese people, from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nothing from the French state absolutely nothing. You know, educating our people about the consequences of radioactive fallout. And the nuclear pollution is still there for I don't know how many years. So the future generation will be impacted by the criminal decision of the former president of France to organize that nuclear testing in our country, in our beautiful country, in this paradise. Thank you.
Thank you, President. I would like to give the floor. I've changed the order of appearance. I would like to give the floor to Professor Jenik Radon. Jenik, I know that you have to leave us soon because you have some other New York-based obligation. Thank you for taking some time. Thank you for your continuous support. We do all here remember what you organized in the Columbia School of International Public Affairs back in 1918, en 2018, and the conference we give you in your headquarters. And thank you again for joining us. And please give us some advice on this specific issue of compensation to nuclear victims. How should we tackle the issue? How should we organize ourselves in order to go ahead and to overcome all the the French difficulties which are paving our way? Thank you, Professor Radon.
Thank you. And I'm very happy that I can be here even by Zoom. Obviously, in person would be better. And I do apologize that I do have a conflict, so I cannot stay for the full course of the round table. But let me, and I'd be more than happy when in-person events are permitted again, health permitting, to reorganize another conference at Columbia in New York. But that is obviously not going to be this year. It will have to be, unfortunately, sometime in the future. The reason is obvious at this point. But let me say something. While I'm a lawyer and while I obviously believe in the rule of law, unfortunately, we may not get further at this point in time because rule of law does take time, requires patience, but victims do not have time. Victims may have patience, but they do not have time. The other thing which I'd like to mention, and then you'll see where I'm going. Unfortunately, while you have raised an issue which is emotional, which is personal, which is tragic, as well as the country of Algeria has also had, and I just read an article about what happened there too, as well as other places. We have now run into something which is taking worldwide attention. The reason I say attention, you'll see in a second, is climate change and all the impacts of climate change. If you looked what happened in Northern California, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, Yukon, is all of a sudden the largest heat wave they've ever encountered in recorded history. It may have been before, but they don't know it. What I'm getting at is that the round table, by definition, is a small table. It's by invitation, it's by a small number, although it is being voiced worldwide through Facebook. That leads me to what I see as the only way to move things forward, because a direct communication between the governing powers, which is the French state, and yourselves, you have indicated have not gotten very far, or not as far as you would like, in another way of putting it. This means something which I encountered way back when in a totally different context, and it's in a totally different way, but by analogy, I can apply it. In 1979, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. in 1979, I joined in December, January of 1980 with a number of others, and we formed the Afghanistan Relief Committee. There was actually, despite the invasion, relatively little support. Basically, no support. Why? Because it was viewed as the fight between certain groups, the Soviet and the rebels. There were, and once a journalist called them freedom fighters, everything changed. A story was now listened to. Also, journalists became interested in it. Ironically, they were not interested when they were called rebels, but they were the same people who were fighting for their freedom and independence. It was a change of term. What I'm getting at is what needs to be done, and I think I may have mentioned that the first time we met in New York, is a PR campaign which is consistent, regular, worldwide, to go into the court of public opinion. There's the court of justice, obviously, but there's also the court of public opinion. No one likes to be in the court of public opinion, unless you are going to be saying, look at that great person, that hero, that great guy, the person I'd like to be, the best athlete. Yes, he likes to be in the court of public opinion because he'll be glorified, or she. So what I'm getting at is, if you are to move the agenda, which I hope, because there's heartfelt challenges, people who suffered, their children suffer. If you look at Japan, where I'm better acquainted, it goes on from generation to generation. It changed the DNA, sadly, upsettingly, in people. So there is a story that has to be told. And the only story that I knew, let's say consciously of before I met you, although I knew the story, I didn't know the story. There's a difference, there's a consciousness, there's an awareness level. French Polynesia, Tahiti, Bora Bora are beautiful. That's the public image. So that is also an advantage. You have a public image. You have people worldwide who are interested in you, maybe not because they want to come to your beaches, they want to enjoy your life, they want to see your beauty. So what I'm getting at is a very short message. You need to enlist the best people who know how to bring a message, a story across, not today, not tomorrow, but every day. That means it cannot just be a one-off. It has to be a consistent story that captures, unfortunately, for lack of a better term, the imagination, that captures the sympathy, that captures the attention when we have climate change and other existential problems right now. So my message is very, very short and very simple. Focus on PR. That's a terrible term. I don't, PR, it's more than PR. It's a heartfelt, emotional, necessary message. Get the message out, get sympathetic authors, get journalists, get TV people. And who is the real power in the world these days? It's the youth. They know how to do Facebook. They know how to do Twitter. They know how to do all these things. They can do it better than we can. And they enjoy it. I cannot say that I enjoy all these social media, but that's the modern way. Get the youth. They have the energy, they have the time, they have the interest, and most important, they have the ideals. They are free to help. So my message is, bring a story every day until the powers to be listen to the story and provide not just the compensation, but the words, we're sorry. It took, in the case of Namibia, 100 years for the Germans to reconcile with what happened over 100 years ago. Let us not wait, because last I looked, I cannot be 100 and some odd ones. I'm not going to be around that long. So doctors tell me I'd like to be around that long, but I want to be here when that message gets out. So please get into the court of public opinion as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wadden. Thank you for this very both emotional and substantive contribution. I retain from your message that public image can and public opinion can have an impact on policy and transform policy. And indeed, we will recall your suggestion of public relation development within our party and our aims. So thank you again for your contribution. Hopefully we will see you very soon. We are considering mission, but of course this is all pending the sanitary constraints which are evolving day after day. We are considering a Tabini Huira'atira mission in New York in October to attend the fourth commission of the United Nations, as we do every year. We couldn't do it this year due to the pandemic, but we will keep you posted. And if ever indeed we can attend the fourth commission as we plan, we will let you know in advance. And of course, we will try to meet you there. Thank you, Professor Wadden. I would like to give the floor to Thomas Statius, who joined us. Thank you again. And after to Nick McClellan. Thank you all for waiting. We will come to you shortly. Thank you so much. Thomas, you have the floor.
Si ça vous dérange pas, je vais parler en français, parce que c'est la langue que j'ai utilisée pour parler avec pas mal des intervenants qui sont autour de cette table, donc il y aurait quelque chose d'assez peu naturel pour moi de parler en anglais. Je vous remercie d'abord tous de m'avoir avec vous ce soir, c'est un plaisir. Je m'excuse pour Sébastien qui, pour des raisons familiales, n'a pas pu se dégager du temps ce soir, mais il serait bien sûr ravi, je pense, d'échanger avec vous tous. Et je lui envoie, j'ai été chargé de vous transmettre ces salutations. Pour ma part, j'imaginais un petit peu mon passage à cette conférence comme juste de vous faire une salutation, vous dire bonjour à tous. À vrai dire, je suis plus ouvert peut-être aux questions que vous avez à me poser si vous en avez. Pour raconter un peu le projet du livre, je pense qu'on en a assez parlé. Le projet qu'on avait avec Sébastien, je pense qu'il a émergé assez vite, c'était effectivement de travailler à la fois sur le récit des victimes que défendent les différentes associations qui sont présentes à cette table ronde, que ce soit 193 et Mā'ohi et Tato, mais c'était aussi d'avoir un travail scientifique au croisement entre nos deux disciplines pour effectivement essayer de traiter le problème peut-être un peu différemment de ce qui a été fait jusque-là. Et c'est ce qu'on a essayé de faire modestement. Et je dois dire, par contre, je serai assez bref, mais je pense que, et c'est pour ça que ça m'importait d'être là avec vous ce soir, c'est que, c'est une vraie émotion de voir comment le livre a été reçu, en particulier en Polynésie française. Et c'est vrai que c'est quelque chose qui nous a touchés. De vous entendre en parler aujourd'hui est quelque chose qui, évidemment, nous touche, nous fait dire qu'on a eu raison de le faire et de le faire peut-être comme on l'a fait. C'est rare dans la vie du métier qu'on fait, que ce soit, je pense, pour Sébastien ou pour moi, de changer la vie des gens, de changer la vie de victimes, et j'espère que c'est quelque chose qu'on parviendra à faire. Voilà. J'ai pas, à vrai dire, on a beaucoup parlé avec Sébastien de savoir effectivement si on participait ou non aux tables rondes, aux deux tables rondes. Bon, on n'a pas été conviés à l'autre, donc la question ne s'est pas forcément posée très longtemps. Ceci dit, d'où l'embarras de ma prise de parole, qui est un peu un mélange, c'est que d'une certaine manière, je trouve que notre rôle, en fait, si vous voulez, a été rempli, c'est-à-dire qu'on a fait notre travail. Moi, je trouve ça très chouette que la société civile polynésienne, les forces politiques et associatives s'en saisissent. et que d'une certaine manière, nous, on s'éclipse, qu'on soit toujours là si vous avez besoin, bien sûr, de parler, d'échanger, de discuter, mais que d'une certaine manière, c'est aussi un débat maintenant qui appartient aux gens qui résident en Polynésie française. Et aussi, nous, on a voulu, même si Père Auguste rappelait qu'effectivement, les victimes civiles ont trop longtemps été oubliées, mais aussi aux vétérans à la fois du nucléaire et de l'armée française. Voilà, nous c'était vraiment le sens de notre travail. Mais je m'arrête là. Si Michel ou qui que ce soit autour de la table a des questions, je serai avec plaisir d'y répondre.
Je voudrais vous remercier du fond du cœur au nom de la population Maohi. Retenez bien ce terme, Maohi. Nous allons bientôt sortir des tricots et on va vous envoyer un gift. Maohi Lives Matter, comme Black Lives Matter. Nous ne sommes pas des animaux, nous sommes des êtres humains. Voilà. Et je suis sûr que nous avons le soutien du peuple français. Le peuple français nous soutient. Cette affaire, vous savez, j'ai été témoin de ce qui s'est passé sur l'atoll de Moruroa. Je suis allé la première fois en 1964. Et à chaque fois qu'on y allait, on devait avoir un badge. Mais au retour, on ne savait pas trop, on devait rendre ça, mais la suite, on ne connaît pas. Et en 1976, comme je l'ai déjà dit plusieurs fois, nous avons vu des panneaux un peu partout dans le lagon, dans la cocoterie, les cocoteries jaunir et tout ça, et écrit en rouge, en gros caractères, interdiction de pêcher, zone très contaminée, interdiction de boire de l'eau de coco contaminée. Alors, quand vous êtes père de famille, vous voyez ça, on se dit, c'est pas possible, je ne peux pas me taire. Et nous allons commencer à dénoncer ça. Vous ne pouvez pas savoir les risques qu'on prenait à cette époque-là. C'était en 1976. C'était terrible, terrible. Mais on a pris tous ces risques. Et à chaque fois, on nous répondait, mais vous n'êtes pas des scientifiques. Qu'est-ce que vous connaissez de la radioactivité? Comme je disais tout à l'heure, ce sont les Japonais, ce sont les habitants, quelques habitants de Bikini Islands, des Marshall Islands, qui venaient ici, quand on organisait des manifestations, parler des problèmes qu'ils connaissaient eux, chez eux, et que nous connaissons ici, nous, aujourd'hui, et nous ont prévenus. Et puis d'autres experts qui sont venus de France également. Je veux remercier toutes ces personnes-là qui sont venues aussi ici manifester avec nous pour dire qu'il faut arrêter cette décision qui a été prise par De Gaulle dans un premier temps et puis tous les chefs d'État qui ont suivi. Et vous savez ce qui s'est passé en 1974 avec Centaure. Et il a fallu l'embargo imposé par les syndicats néo-zélandais, australiens pour que la France, Giscard d'Estaing à son époque, décide de faire les essais nucléaires. Mais aujourd'hui, ces deux atolls, Moruroa et Whangatahua, que je connais très très bien, il faut les rayer de la carte du monde. Et je veux remercier aussi le professeur Randon qui vient juste de prendre la parole. On compte sur vous, la jeunesse française, pour parler au peuple français ce qui se passe, de la réalité des essais nucléaires chez nous. Et merci pour ce livre. Merci.
Thank you, President. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thomas, merci de ta prise de parole. Effectivement, la publication du rapport toxique est considérée comme une charnière dans la connaissance et la reconnaissance du fait nucléaire et fait aussi partie, comme l'indiquait le professeur Radon, de ce qu'on peut appeler la campagne d'éducation des populations, l'aspect public relation, comme il l'indiquait, de la prise de conscience. Merci Thomas. Je vais passer la parole à Nick McLellan. Merci. Thank you so much, Nick. I give you the floor and seek your advice on the issue of impact of nuclear activities, and the specific impact on the health and the compensation issue that we have begun to raise. And then we will pass on to the sub-item of this impact issue, which is the environmental impact of the nuclear fact. Regarding the environmental impact discussion, I will try to reduce a little bit the time, because we already have 1 hour 10 minutes of round table, which is expected to have a timing of 1:30 minutes. I think we will try to go to 1:45 minutes, so we will have enough time to tackle the main issue, which is the political agenda, which is the item number 5 on the synopsis. Nick, you have the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to be with you today. I speak to you from Melbourne in Australia, on the lands of the Huira'atira people of the Kulin Nation, land that was never ceded. I'd like to acknowledge the political leaders, former President Temaru, members of the Assembly, Madame Hirschon and Monsieur Geros, church leaders, the Deputy Brotherson, former Senator Huira'atira, and all the participants. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. And listening to the presentations thus far, it's striking the parallels for other peoples across the Pacific who have lived through nuclear testing programs and continue to live with the health impacts. The Aboriginal people of South Australia from British nuclear testing at Maralinga and Emu Field, the people of the Marshall Islands, 67 United States tests at Bikini and Eniwetok atolls. One of the lesser known cases in the region, the British thermonuclear tests at Christmas and Malden Islands. I published recently a book grappling with the bomb about the British nuclear program in what's today the Republic of Kiribati. President Temaru talked about the signs that said don't go fishing because of radioactive contamination. The British had regulations for the 14,000 troops that were there during the testing program on Christmas Island, not to eat the fish. But there was a contingent of Fijian soldiers and sailors, part of the British Army at the time, who were there. And when I interviewed the Fijians for the book, they said, well, we're Pacific Islanders, of course we ate the fish. So there you have a situation where the Fijians were, not just eating the British bully beef and so on, but they went fishing, they caught crabs, they lived their Pacific life on the island as they believed one should. So the British regulations said don't eat the fish, but the lived experience of people who were there was that the Gilbert Islands, the labourers who helped build the British nuclear base there, the Fijian troops who were there, they went about their life as per normal. And that tension between the official record, where the British government today says we had regulations to reduce the ingestion of hazardous radioactive isotopes. So you have to believe the official record that we, tried to maintain safety records, and the lived experience of participants at the tests who today are still living with the health consequences is a very important part of the story. And so as a journalist, I've been involved in trying to tease out those two different aspects. The importance of documenting the lived experience, the voices of people who participated in the tests, both military personnel, scientists, but particularly people who are often forgotten, the workers who made these things happen, the people who were everything from cleaners to cooks to truck drivers to the people who did the laundry for the scientists. There are many, many people. And in the book I wrote, Grappling with the Bomb, tried to capture that diversity of participants. So I think the work that Huira'atira and other groups have done to document that personal history is a very important part of the work that needs to be done. Secondly, comparing that oral history to the documentary record is important because the British state, the American state rely on that documentary record for their defense that the tests were clean, that there were no problems, or when they get dragged kicking and screaming to the state of acknowledging there were problems, they then say, well, the problems weren't so bad, and so on. So those two tasks of firstly documenting the lived experience of participants, and secondly, comparing it to the documentary record is a key part of this process. Of course, to compare it to the documentary record involves transparency and openness by the state. And we see whether it comes to the French government, the British government, the United States government on this question, the issue of national security constantly trumps this need for openness and transparency. And this is a second crucial battle. As well as documenting the voices of participants, it's to get the state authorities to open the archives. And tragically, we see this in many cases where today the British government is actually closing files about the nuclear tests conducted at Maralinga, at Emu Fields, at Montebello, at Malden Island, Christmas Island. Researchers like Sue Rabbit-Roff, Elizabeth Tynan, and others are finding that documents that they need for historical work are in fact being withdrawn from public access. And I found that with my book. So I think this is a real challenge for the French state if it really wants to have a dialogue about the health impacts. That question of opening up the archives, ignoring the so-called national security restrictions that have closed archives, it's a central question. And you saw this with the United States and the Marshall Islands. In 1986, as they formed the Compact of Free Association, an agreement between the United States and the Marshall Islands, there were negotiations around the legacies, the health legacies of the nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands. And the Marshall Islands signed a deal, essentially, in very shorthand, given the time is short, that they would take a fund of $150 million to compensate the survivors of the tests. That money soon ran out. And indeed, the Nuclear Claims Tribunal in the Marshall Islands, a formal legal process, issued rulings of more than $2.6 billion due for health and environmental impacts. That money has not been paid by the United States. But in 1996, the government declassified a number of documents that weren't available to the Marshall Islands a decade before when they were negotiating these agreements. And those documents showed that not just the northern atolls of the Marshall Islands, 4 northern atolls, were affected by radio fallout, but more than 20 atolls were affected. And these documents came from the 1950s. So the US government knew from their own archives that 20, not 4 atolls had been affected by fallout, and they went into the negotiations without revealing that information. So this question of access to the documents is crucial. And the final one is to put those pieces together to create a compensation system. United States, as I say, had the Nuclear Claims Tribunal and the Marshall Islands government, and today the Marshall Islands still has a National Nuclear Commission working on these issues. And that may be something for French Polynesia to consider, a body within the government of your country that will address and follow through these questions. And secondly, the need to ensure that compensation mechanisms actually compensate people. In the first 5 years of Operation CIVEN, the French compensation scheme, only granted 2%. And I don't have to tell participants like Per Webbe-Carlson and others that this has to be transformed. Britain refuses to set up a compensation scheme. And so the battle that you're waging about these issues, the rights of participants, opening up the archives, appropriate compensation and reparation schemes, this is a battle going on all around the Pacific. And that's why I'm pleased to be with you today. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you for the opportunity to participate in the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Nick, for your contribution. Indeed, we take note of your point, and we know that documentation, testimony, documentary record is one of the key of the issue to go a step further. In addition, as you mentioned, we are facing indeed the declassification issue or the non-declassification issue, and at all level, at governmental level, at our level, and even the association at sanitary level, it's becoming more and more difficult for a nuclear victim to file its own medical file, to reconciliate the files, because at one point we always end up in front of a wall, and the wall is being the either the administrative lockdown or the secret défense or whatever. So indeed, this is something that we do consider. I will give the floor to Eliane Tebaichua to close this segment on the nuclear impact on health, as Eliane has a specific expertise on health issue, and then we will pass on the issue of the environmental impact on of the nuclear effect. Eliane, you have the floor.
Yaorana à tous. D'abord, je souhaiterais remercier le président Oscar Temaru d'avoir eu l'initiative de cette table ronde dans notre pays, et je souhaite me présenter sommairement. Je suis sage-femme, midwife, et j'ai commencé à travailler à la maternité de Maohi, qui est la principale maternité en Polynésie, à partir du début des années 80. Et j'ai fait mes études en France, à Bordeaux plus exactement. Et quand je suis revenue dans mon pays, donc j'ai pratiqué des accouchements. Et il y avait toujours quelque chose qui me surprenait, c'était de constater, je n'étais pas la seule à faire ce constat-là, également mes collègues sages-femmes, qui sont aujourd'hui disparus, c'était de constater le nombre de malformations à la naissance chez les enfants polynésiens. Et donc, les explications qui nous étaient données à l'époque par le corps médical, c'était que c'était à cause de la consanguinité qu'il y avait autant de malformations. Mais il arrive à un moment où, dans un raisonnement intellectuel, ce n'est plus un argument que l'on peut accepter devant la manière courante dont on voyait ces malformations à la naissance, devant le constat, quand on interrogeait les parents, que ces malformations-là n'ont jamais existé dans leur propre famille, et quand on avait affaire à des jeunes femmes des Tuamotu en parfaite santé et dont le premier enfant était malformé ou décédé à la naissance. Donc, au fur et à mesure de mes années de pratique professionnelle, c'était quelque chose, ce déni qui existait au niveau du corps médical, mais aussi au niveau de toute la société, de ces faits réels. Il y a quand même eu beaucoup d'enfants qui sont des malformés, qui ont gardé des séquelles. Eh bien, ce n'était pas acceptable, intellectuellement d'abord. Et ce que j'avais remarqué, c'est que pendant mes études en métropole, les grands professeurs d'obstétrique nous faisaient des cours sur des malformations et ils nous disaient, eh bien, ces malformations-là, peut-être que vous allez en voir, mais c'est tellement rare que vous ne risquez pas de les voir. Eh bien, j'ai eu malheureusement à expérimenter dans mon propre pays le fait de voir passer toutes ces malformations qui étaient décrites comme rarissimes, qu'on ne voyait que dans les bouquins. Et donc, il y avait ce constat-là, mais en même temps aussi, il y avait une chape de plomb qui reposait sur la société polynésienne et aussi au niveau de la communauté médicale. Hein. Il y avait comme un déni de reconnaître l'existence de ces conséquences dans la descendance du peuple polynésien. Et on peut constater actuellement, de manière très factuelle, quand on regarde les statistiques au niveau de la CPS, du nombre de personnes atteintes de cancer, que ces statistiques-là évoluent de manière exponentielle. Il n'y a jamais de descente, de baisse de ces chiffres-là. Chaque année amène son lot de nouveaux cas de cancer dans la population. Et bien, rapporté au nombre de personnes qui habitent en Polynésie, il y a de quoi interpeller, même les scientifiques. Et ce que l'on remarque, c'est que, eh bien non, on tourne les yeux, on ne veut pas voir ces chiffres-là. Il y a donc, d'une part, les cancers qui sont extrêmement élevés dans notre population, et d'autre part, le refus, le déni d'effectuer des études sur notre descendance, sur des études génétiques. Donc, même au niveau de notre gouvernement, il y a ce déni. On ne veut pas. Leur argument, c'est de dire, eh bien, les essais nucléaires se sont passés il y a une trentaine d'années, eh bien, 30 ans après, il ne peut plus y avoir de conséquences. Si à la limite, ils admettent qu'il y a eu des gens qui ont eu des cancers, il y a eu des conséquences sur les vétérans qui ont été travaillés sur les sites, mais aujourd'hui, ça ne peut plus exister. Il nie tout simplement le fait que quand on prend le plutonium, ben le plutonium, il contamine notre environnement naturel pendant 25 000 ans. Et ça, ils ne veulent pas l'admettre, ils ne veulent pas le voir. Et donc, on assiste actuellement à cette tentative que l'on peut voir au niveau de Paris, c'est, bon, on va vous donner quelque chose, mais après, ne nous parlez plus du nucléaire, alors que les conséquences vont être sur notre descendance. Et tout ce qu'on demande, c'est de la transparence et qu'il y ait effectivement des études génétiques, des études sur l'ADN du peuple polynésien qui soient effectuées de manière à avoir des données exactes, scientifiques sur ce sujet-là. Donc, voilà un peu mon ressenti en tant qu'ancienne professionnelle de la santé. Et il y a encore, même si les essais sont terminés depuis plus d'une trentaine d'années, près d'une trentaine d'années, il y a les conséquences sur notre descendance, sur nos enfants. On ne peut pas, en tant que parents, en tant que grands-parents, accepter que à partir de ces débats qui ont lieu à Paris, ben on ferme tout, il n'y a plus rien, on va vous donner quelques compensations et on ferme le banc. Non, il y a des conséquences et le peuple polynésien demande à ce qu'il y ait ces recherches qui soient effectuées. Donc, c'est sur ces deux thématiques-là, les cancers actuellement et les conséquences génétiques, que je me permettais d'intervenir aujourd'hui. Je vous remercie.
Merci Eliane. Je vais donner la parole rapidement à Roland qui va faire une traduction synthétique. Roland will proceed with a quick synthetic translation. Then I will give the floor to Vanessa Griffin. I recognize you wanted to say a few words, I think, on the health issue and your last visit in French Polynesia back in 2018. And then I think that Maohi has requested the floor. So we'll proceed on like that. Please, Roland.
So Mrs. Eliane Teraitua told us that as before becoming a midwife, she did her study in France and facing experts, French doctors in France, they told them as students that it will be very exceptional to find misformation on a baby at birth. But on her way back to Tahiti, and as a professional, as midwife, she saw so many, the opposite, she saw the opposite during her work. Many of Polynesian children were born with formation at birth. So she was very confused about what she'd studied, about the official talks of French doctors in France and what happens in French Polynesia during the nuclear testing period. So it is important to make study on what happened to future generation about their health. And the number of cancer from Social Security statistics is growing fast. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. Moite, I think, Vanessa, are you available now? And so I give you the floor.
Yes, I am. Yeah, thank you. I know you have very little time, but I wanted to put in this intervention now before you move on from health. And I'm glad we've heard from someone from your health. Sorry, I'm back. Can you hear me now? Yeah, I'm a long nuclear free and independent Pacific activist and so on, but I want to speak from the fact of my one and only visit to Maui Nui in 2018, where I was with a very small team just to listen to the nuclear stories again. And I was with Reverend Nambaki from Fiji and Reverend Nafuki from Vanuatu. But my own background is I have written on health for Pacific women, and I've also actually worked in the health department in Papua New Guinea as an information person. So when I came to listen to those stories, I was particularly interested in hearing about what is the health structure, what is the response to what obviously would be, after 30 years of nuclear testing, you will have illnesses. We all know this. So let us disregard any medical or health or information from the perpetrators that nothing has happened. I just want to make a few points because you're wanting suggestions for compensation and for the future. What I observed there was the enormous effort, the incredibly cruel and inhumane, and in fact, it's against medical practices anywhere in the world where the victims and people are ill, have to prove their illnesses, make a history of it, and make cases to even get treatment or compensation. I think that process should be rejected as not consistent with the medical oaths that doctors take, and that there should not be this compilation per patient to even get compensation or even get health. I observed, we listened to Huira'atira, we listened to people from the Presbyterian Church, we listened to Association 193, and people are spending a lot of time on documenting and having huge files, 500 cases or long or more, and you would have only 5 or 9 or smaller, terrible statistics of where the health report is even accepted. So I think that process should be rejected. Secondly, you're the only place surely where there is a list of illnesses where you actually have to prove this came from the testing. Again, an enormous waste of time and effort, and a denial that the tests cause any illness. But just on very practical matters, what struck me is I kept asking, where do you go for healthcare in Maui? What is your system? Where do you go? And there's an extraordinary fact that you can only go to the military health clinic, and that is extraordinary and should be changed. I'm sure you have other health structures and clinics, but I think that is the direction one should go in thinking of compensation and response to health. Because having worked in PNG and when you have clinics, maternal and child health clinics, these are for women and children, for many other areas. In your case, I think one should look at and demand structures of health response in the country that can be countrywide, and that this is a right. and that should be put forward. So I think in terms of compensation, I would like to think of actually budgeting, putting forward a structure across the country where you respond to people's health the impacts. And also then, of course, there are many other illnesses much more serious where there's an extraordinary difficulty of getting health and medical care. That is an abuse of Maui Nui lives. And Maui Nui lives matter and their health matters. And that should be a very strong message. And it is against any other country's medical practice to have to go through what you're going through to even have something accepted as an illness. One case I remember someone saying his wife, it took 13 years before they accepted she had a case. This should not even be considered medically acceptable or morally or ethically acceptable. Second, so on medical compensation, I think one should think of the structures and a huge input of resources into the health system and the structures that you have, or demand them as part of compensation and responding to the health impacts. So I just wanted to say that because it struck me so much. Having one clinic, we even did manage to meet the local government and your so-called representatives there. And of course, they have a whole new line that France is responding to the tests and acknowledging them. We now know that is not true. But then I said, well, what are you putting the money into? And they said, infrastructure. What infrastructure? This is where I think one should make another request and make it very clear one wants health infrastructure. Demand that these structures are there that can respond across the country to the majority of people, and that is decentralized and many, as well as, of course, health personnel. And I couldn't hear all the response from the person who was there, but you also should have particularly a gender differential for women and children, because there are gender differences in the health impacts. So I just wanted to say that, and to say definitely your lives matter and your health matters. And this is an appalling abuse of humanity that you have medical personnel or the silence of medical personnel. And I would say politically also go to that whole medical and health profession around the world to get them to know what's going on. Thank you very much for giving me this moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Indeed, the response we receive from the medical structure here is not fully adequate. So this is something that we do consider. And your suggestion to foresee a kind of budgeting within a compensation package of the healthcare issue we face would be a path to better explore, and it is a very good suggestion. Thank you again. I will give the floor to Maohi Broderson. Maohi, tu as la parole, et ensuite on passe au point sur l'impact environnemental du fait nucléaire. Merci, Maohi.
Yeah, thank you, Michel. I just wanted to add one point on the health issue. When I presented my law proposal on June 17th, I was struck by part of the answer from Mrs. Florence Parly, the Minister of Defense, in France, because she was basically saying in her answer that during the whole French nuclear testing, the French state has always been very cautious to take good care of the health of all the people in Polynesia. And, you know, these are hard lies to listen to, especially when you consider that within the French Republic, there are only 2 territories that do not have a register for cancers, and one of them is French Polynesia, and that's not, there's nothing random about it. So, you know, it's always unpleasant to hear a state minister lie to your face in such cold blood.
Merci Maohi. Mais malheureusement, je crois que les mensonges ne vont pas s'arrêter là et qu'ils vont continuer demain à la poursuite de la... Mais... Yes.
I have a big question mark about the doctors in this country. You know, all those years after every death, they have to make a certificate, and every certificate said normal, natural death, all those years. Are they really doctors? That's a question mark.
Thank you, President. On va passer au deuxième point de la thématique sur l'impact du fait nucléaire. On avait abordé l'impact en matière de santé. Et maintenant, je voudrais aborder rapidement, mais on va le faire un peu rapidement, le point de l'impact environnemental. Le problème sur cette thématique, c'est que nous sommes pris dans un dilemme qui est presque irréconciliable. C'est qu'on sait, et il est prouvé, et personne ne peut le nier, c'est que les effets du fait nucléaire sur l'environnement sont incommensurables. Ce sont des pollutions qui ont un timing qui s'apparente à l'éternité. Eliane le rappelait tout à l'heure, l'impact du plutonium ou la radioactivité ont un impact sur l'environnement qui est colossal et qui ne peut pas être corrigé. C'est ça le problème. Notre héritage est vraiment quelque chose que l'on va devoir porter sur des générations et des générations. Donc, en face d'une pollution environnementale telle que celle que nous connaissons notamment à Mururoa, à Ho, à Fangataufa, qu'est-ce qu'on peut raisonnablement espérer et demander? Il y a un principe qui dit, et on nous l'a dit ici, et c'était le Premier ministre Rocard quand il est passé, qui paye contrôle. Et on pourrait lui répondre maintenant, mais qui pollue paye? Comment est-ce qu'on réconcilie les dommages à l'environnement qui nous ont été causés alors qu'on sait qu'ils sont irrémédiables et le fait de retrouver une réparation environnementale? Est-ce que c'est possible? Est-ce que c'est envisageable? Et comment est-ce qu'on perçoit ce problème? Est-ce que, Roland, tu peux prendre la parole pour indiquer à nos interlocuteurs étrangers, et je vais passer la parole à professeur Vijay Naidu from the University of the South Pacific. I will give you the floor, but before Roland will make a short translation of a few words.
Mr. Chair President, just mentioned the environmental impacts and long-lasting pollution on Mururoa and Fangantau. The depollution issues, what can we expect from French government, how to do it? And yes, those are questions about this issue.
Thank you. I give the floor to Professor Vijay Naidu from the University of the South Pacific, and then to Stephanie. I see that Stephanie Mills has raised and requested the floor. Professor Vijay Naidu, you have the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to begin by expressing my appreciation for the invitation to participate in this very historic and important roundtable. And I'd like to express my respect for the President, Oscar Timaru, and for all the people in the room there in the round table sitting with you, and the international guests who all struggle and express solidarity for the struggle for the independence of the Maohi New people. And I'd like to express my strong support and solidarity for the Maohi New people. As the President would know, I participated in the Nuclear Free and Independent Pacific movement and was the president of the Fiji Anti-Nuclear Group when the French were testing in Mururoa and Whangataufa. I think Nick McClellan has covered very well the failure of the powerful countries that tested their nuclear weapons in our Pacific Ocean, which is now called the Nuclear Ocean because of all the nuclear bombings and tests that have taken place here. And these countries, as Nick has pointed out, refuse to accept the responsibility, have not been transparent. However, the Americans actually, in agreeing to the compact, had set up processes accepting some responsibility, however limited. In the case of the French and the British, they have accepted no responsibility. And therefore, what I want to focus on very quickly is what we should do in terms of the political campaign. I think there should be a massive global campaign to expose the lie. And that book, Toxic, is very important weapon, as is the book by Nick, grappling with the British tests. So those are important documents that we can take forward. And the kinds of comments that were made about health and the environment, including by my friend Vanessa, actually are very material to the campaign. I'd like to say that in terms of the campaign, how you were able to reinscribe Maohi New in the Committee of 24 is the process, the known pathway to follow. And although the influence of the churches have diminished somewhat in the 21st century, they are still a very important organization in our part of the world. So I think working with the Maohi Protestant Church Council, the Pacific Council of Churches, and the World Council of Churches is a very important pathway for this massive PR campaign to expose the French lie. Is very important. Secondly, we can use the treaties, South Pacific Regional Nuclear Free Zone Treaty, the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons Treaty, to bring to light what is happening. And in the questions that were asked to me, there was a question about the dome in Runit Island. Now that has drawn people's attention because of climate change and the rising sea level. And with the high tides, we are finding that the amount of radioactive material, including plutonium, moving out into the sea is increasing. So that could be a basis for, enlivening the campaign around the whole nuclear environmental impacts. And with regards to the treaties, it's important that the international human rights aspect should be taken up. So in 2012, for instance, the Marshall Islands had the Human Rights Rapporteur come and report on what has happened there. And that was then taken to the UN General Assembly by the Human Rights Council. So I think France would be a signatory to some of the international human rights treaty. And annually there is a universal periodic review. And with the assistance of other Global South organizations, the movement in Maohi New can take this up and present it as questions to the French state about the lie that they have been living and pushing on the people of Maohi. With regards to the Pacific campaign, and I think my colleague Maureen Panjueli can talk more about it, but besides the Pacific Council of Churches, there is a whole network of Pacific regional organizations, including PENG, who are standby to take up the campaign. At USP, we have the Marshall Islands Students Association, which has reactivated consciousness and awareness, as well as activities around what has happened in the Marshall Islands. And finally, with regards to PIFs, I think the geopolitics of the region can work in favor of indigenous peoples of the region. What has happened is because Australia, Canada, USA, Britain have been targeting China for its violation of human rights in China with the people there. The Chinese have turned around and pointed fingers at the US, Canada, Britain, and Australia about their treatment of indigenous people. So in that context, you can see that there is some leverage there for people to bring attention to the Pacific Island Forum leaders and to the Secretariat that actually, you know, the Chinese have highlighted this. What are you doing about it? And so there is a campaign around there as well. I want to conclude there and congratulate you and commend you for the struggle that we are all part of.
Professor Naidu, thank you so much for your contribution. I think you have exactly made the translation from one issue to the other one, from environmental and sanitary issue to the more political one, as you addressed the role that could play some international organisms like the Human Rights Commission. And indeed, I recall, and I think that Carlisle Corbyn, if he's still there, could ascertain that. But I think regarding to there is an issue pending, I think, in front of the Human Rights Commission dealing with the Marshall Island and maybe the Renit Dome we address, because this Renit Dome is coming back on the loop now, in fact, due to the climate change issue. And it's a risk. It's not only a risk for Marshall Island, but it's also a risk for the whole Pacific, the whole world. And the whole world. We speak of the impact of Fukushima and the Japanese government overflowing contaminated water from Fukushima in the Pacific, but nobody speaks of the Renit Dome, which is on the verge of not explosion, but effondrement. So it's the same issue. So thank you again for raising this very precise issue. I will give the floor to Stephanie. Stephanie, you have the floor, and then we will embark in the last segment of the roundtable dealing with the political outcome. It is how do we negotiate in the multilateral area within the UN, or do we carry on to hope to discuss on a bilateral way with friends? You have the floor. Thank you so much.
Kia ora from Aotearoa to everybody in Te Maunui, and Oscar and Taya in particular. It's lovely to see and hear you, and thank you to everyone for creating this platform for this conversation. It's made me reflect on the fact that, you know, this is unfinished business for a lot of us, but it's not a present and a present fact in my life every day in the way that it is yours. So I want to acknowledge the pain and the hurt and the harm that has happened, and also to acknowledge that this is going to be an intergenerational issue for a long time to come, as people have said. And so we need to be thinking of some long-term structures and solutions, as well as immediate solutions for people who are currently experiencing that harm and that hurt. I really liked the idea of some kind of commission for truth and justice and reconciliation, as it were, maybe not reconciliation at this point, but I think there are some opportunities thinking about the context here where we have a foreign minister who is Māori and has, I think, a more independent view of foreign affairs than we've had in the past. I think there could be some potential to be talking with iwi, Māori and her in Aotearoa now that we are moving, hopefully, out of the COVID situation. I think also that when I first started working with Greenpeace and we were planning and thinking about how to end testing, one of the things that we, I guess, thought about was what did François Mitterrand want to leave as his political legacy. And one of the things he wanted to do actually was to be seen as kind of more of a peacemaker than a war maker. And I think that was a factor in why France originally agreed to the moratorium, and then of course ultimately once Chirac got in and there was that global kind of focus on the resumption of testing, why it ended. So I think it's, even though the roundtable in Paris is, I agree, a farce, I don't think we should underestimate sometimes the fragility of the state and the way it has to use these farces to cover up what it knows is wrong. So if they were genuinely untroubled by the situation, they wouldn't even have bothered with this very untransparent roundtable. So I think you have to take some courage and some hope from the fact that even these not very good and not very open processes are a result of your constant struggle. I also take heart from what Taya said about the fact that 30 years ago we were treated, all of us, as terrorists, and now we are kind of respectable old people. But this is a long job, and we have to move the political and social consensus about what is right. And finally, I would say that I think that with all of these issues of compensation and support for people's health, what we have to fight for is a no-fault system that puts the onus on the state, not on the people. We have that system here called the accident compensation system. It's not perfect, but it means that if you have an accident, you get support regardless of who caused it, or you don't have to go to court to prove it, etc. I think we need to take that as a fundamental principle, that it has to be a no-fault system, that the onus of proof or whatever is on the state, not on the individual. And finally, I want to say bon courage and kia kaha, especially to the amazing wahine toa around the Pacific who have kept this fight going. And lovely to see you all, and thank you very much for the privilege of being able to be here. Ka kite.
Thank you, Vanessa. I think that the no-fault, Stephanie, thank you, Stephanie. I think that the no-fault system you mentioned on the a way to resolve the health impact is something that we should consider, and it's a very good suggestion. Before we move to the next political item, I would like to go back to the environmental issue, because we need to hear two of our present guests, Mr. Frère Maxime Chan and then Gilles Parzi, who will address the environmental impact And I give the floor to Maxime. Je pense que tu peux t'adresser en français. Et le sujet que j'avais évoqué de la pollution, dépollution, tu souhaitais l'évoquer et nous donner quelques pistes de réflexion sur ce thème. Merci, frère Maxime.
Merci, Rana. Très brièvement, hein, c'est parce que c'est pas la peine de répéter les mêmes choses que les autres ont déjà dit. Un simple constat d'abord, nous avons vu que, en ce qui concerne, disons, les sites de pollution, de dépollution, tout cela, tout ce qui a été fait jusqu'ici, c'était vraiment de l'amateurisme, n'est-ce pas? Nous avons été témoins à Hao, par exemple, que le responsable des dépollutions ne savait même pas où se trouvaient, disons, les sites réels, dangereux, de laboratoires et les endroits où il y aurait eu des dépôts de plutonium. Il découvrait avec M. Barillot, avec le haut-commissaire. Donc, c'était de l'amateurisme. On nous menait en bateau en disant qu'il y avait la dépollution ici ou là. Bon, on dépasse ce stade-là. Nous essayons d'avoir, pour l'avenir, nous avons besoin ici de véritables personnes qui peuvent nous renseigner exactement où se trouvent les choses. Donc, nous avons besoin d'experts internationaux pour d'abord décrypter ce qui a été dans tous les rapports, que ce soit annuel ou bien tous les 2 ans, sur l'état des lieux radiologiques en Polynésie française. Pour pouvoir donc examiner cela, nous avons besoin d'experts internationaux indépendants de l'État français. Et deuxièmement, il faut avoir un langage disons, de vérité. Il n'y a pas, comme on l'a déjà répété tout à l'heure, il faut dire que c'est impossible de dépolluer. Donc, il ne faut pas parler de dépollution, surtout pour les 2 atolls de Moruroa et de Fangataufa. Et donc, considérer que c'est perdu et que qu'est-ce que ça va devenir pour ces 2 atolls? Une proposition, eh bien, c'est un dépotoir nucléaire s'il le faut. Et donc, travailler dans ce sens-là pour la compensation et pour la destinée de ces 2 atolls, il faut avoir un langage réel et non pas dire on va quand même dépolluer, on va vous le rendre peut-être habitable. Bon, il faut que ce soit un langage réel, véritable. Voilà ce que je pourrais dire en ce qui concerne l'environnement. Nous savons où se trouvent déjà tous les dépôts, hein, que ce soit au fond des puits, que ce soit au fond du lagon, surtout dans le côté nord-est, c'est là que c'est le plus dangereux. Et puis tout ce qui a été immergé, que ce soit à la pince de Moruroa, que ce soit à la pince de Hao, enfin, nous savons à peu près. Donc, il faut savoir. Ah oui, il y a une autre chose peut-être que nous réclamons, c'est la déclassification, comme on le demandait tout à l'heure, pour avoir une vue un peu plus exacte de la situation exacte de la pollution. Voilà ce que je pourrais ajouter.
Merci, frère Maxime. Effectivement, je vois que tu as touché du doigt la problématique de la réparation environnementale, qui est celle de ce qu'on appelle la réelle politique. Il y a un seuil au-delà duquel on ne peut plus dépolluer. Donc, il faut prendre ça en considération. Je vais donner la parole à Gilles, qui va intervenir en dernier sur la thématique de l'environnement. Et ensuite, je crois que Maureen voulait intervenir également. Et et ensuite, ils vont intervenir sur le dernier segment, sur l'aspect politique et international. Gilles.
Yaurana, thank you for the organization of this roundtable. We all agree that we have been abused by this abomination at many levels. What I would say as in my professional part is about the farmers, organic farmers that are even suffering, still suffering about this, their own commodity that they are not able to export properly because of this paradise image that have been tainted by the nuclear contamination. On the other hand, organic fruits and vegetables allow their regular consumers to be resistant to this nuclear contamination. However, the development of organic farming is really hampered by limited incomes from exports. So we are legitimate in the Pacific to demand compensation also for this scourge and to have also a real development for organics in the Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilles. I will give the floor to Maureen, Carlisle, and Enna, and therefore we will embark in the last item of the roundtable, which is the political output of this exercise. And the dilemma is a very tough and difficult one, because how do we negotiate such issues we have addressed? How do we negotiate compensation? What do we negotiate exactly? Compensation, lump sums, excuses, royalties, compacts, financial package, and who and where do we negotiate exactly? Do we negotiate in a bilateral scheme like the one being currently experienced in Paris with the Recotica delegation in Paris, but unfortunately we know what will be the outcome of this table ronde? Or do we negotiate on a multilateral basis? And this is a choice that President Temaru has made, negotiation within or with or under the umbrella of the United Nations. And this is what we do with the help of Carlisle. So this would be the last questioning, the bilateral aspects of our struggle towards or versus the multilateral approach. I give the floor to Maureen, to Carlisle, Enna, and then we will close the meetings by a final words by most of the participants. Thank you. You have the floor.
Nisambulavanaka and Noia Emori. It is really a privilege to join you all today on this really important occasion and to stand in solidarity with the people of Maohi Nui. I wanted to respond in the following ways and introduce a couple of R's. And I think the first R is one of reconciliation. And this is a very important point because I think for Pacific peoples, we have to reconcile with our own histories, our own sets of histories that for many of us, we do not know or understand. I represent probably a bridging generation, in the sense that I came at the very end of the formidable nuclear free and independent movement. And in fact, I've joined Greenpeace and started to reconcile this level of awareness and consciousness about this troubling history that most Pacific Islanders simply do not know. In saying that about reconciliation, the organization that I work for and the Pacific regional NGOs, we are committed to re-educating our own people so that we do not forget the history of struggles and the pursuance of justice going forward. The re-education includes our young people who don't know that this history exists and exists really, really quite closely. So that's the first R that I want to talk about. It's to reconcile our own people with our own sets of history, a troubling history. Politically, it is quite clear that there are some fundamental key breakthroughs that I think would be quite useful at this stage. The report Toxic is quite useful, and I think that probably for the leadership, you need to try all pathways going forward. I think it would be very useful that you gain more recognition of the nuclear fact and the establishment of the nuclear fact through Toxic, the report itself. I would agree with Professor Vijay Naidu is that we need to reconnect again with the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat to acknowledge the existence of this report and by way of the nuclear fact that is currently being established. I also think that we have lots of work to do in the organization of the African, Caribbean, Pacific in Brussels to also move to endorse and recognize the nuclear fact and the findings of Toxic as a report. So I think recognition is significantly important. Political recognition is extremely important to give way to the Tahiti nuclear cause. My second key point around recognition would be to support a Truth and Reconciliation Tribunal to be held in French-occupied Polynesia. And I say that it would be also a very good idea to then extend invitation, not just to the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Indigenous Peoples, but to extend to the Special Rapporteurs on health, on food, and also water, to bear witness to the tribunal's hearing that you've put forward. I would also encourage the political leadership to consider that as a young Pacific, a bridge, I'm not young, nor am I too old, but what we have seen is the historical vision of all of our Pacific leaders in the past, 50 years, 60 years going forward. We have always been forefronting in our vision, and to declare a decade for nuclear justice starting in 2022, which aligns with the ratification of one of the most significant treaties. If we start with the declaration, we draw the global community's attention to resolve questions of restitution, remediation, and reparation, because there is so much work. We have seen, and I was reminded quite recently with Hilda Lini, she reminded me that before the global community announced a decade on ocean science, Pacific people announced a decade of science. So we should move forward and consider announcing 2022, the decade for nuclear justice from this region. This is the region that needs to lead globally, and particularly in the UN track to adopt that. I want to just probably end by saying that we remain absolutely committed in solidarity to whatever decisions you take to support and ensure that justice is achieved in this lifetime. Whether it is small, medium, or much longer term, we remain committed. And to that extent, I want to introduce one final R, and that is really the efforts of regional civil society organizations to reconnect all of our social justice movements. Again, we have for too long been fighting in different parts of the ocean on the same issues against the same colonizing powers. We need to reconnect, and we stand committed in solidarity to all efforts going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. We will recall the R's you mentioned, the reconciliation one, the political recognition one, the issue of regionalism, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission ID. And indeed, these are very, very prosperous suggestions. Thank you so much.
And
yeah,
decade for justice.
And the decade for justice within the UN circle. So this is some very practical suggestion, and we are up to taking them into consideration and brought them to life. Thank you so much. This is a very substantive contribution. I will give the floor to Carlisle, who is our representative in New York, and hopefully, Carlisle, we will meet you soon in October, but we will carry on to discuss this very, very soon. Dr. Carlisle, you have the floor. Thank you so much. Carlisle, you have the floor.
Laurana, it's a pleasure to be here, Mr. President, President Temaru, Deputy Brotherson, the Tavini family, all the participants here today. I thank you for the opportunity to participate. I see an old colleague, Nick McKellen. I appreciate his presence as well. We've worked together on a number of things for a number of years, but it hasn't been too long before we need to get back together again and have some discussions on the way forward. I'd like to pick up from some of the initiatives that Maureen has mentioned, and I think they're very important, particularly as it relates to the question of our looking at the potential for continuation and expansion of the multilateral approach, both regionally as well as globally. And some of the initiatives obviously can be initiated through the Pacific Islands Forum, even within the context of that. Although there's, and with respect to the Pacific Small Island Developing States grouping at the United Nations, which was very instrumental, if we recall, in 2013 and prior to 2013, obviously, in leading us to the reinscription, which was only first time, well, the third time in the history of the United Nations that this is actually was able to happen. And I have my two compatriots with me today. I'm very happy to see Richard and Motai, who worked so closely with them on this issue. Now we're now focusing on the 10th. About this time will be November, just December will be the 10th resolution adopted by the General Assembly, according on the question of Maui Nui. There were two resolutions in 2013 and one subsequently after that. And I think one of the main issues in terms of the global multilateral context is the fact that we need to get now focus on the implementation of those resolutions, and that's always been a challenge. This year, of course, made it even more interesting and challenging because of the fact that I was present at the meeting of the Committee of 24. The representative of the government was also there, and of course, the representative of the government position is always that everything is fine. There's no need to change. In fact, questioning the very inscription process. That seems to be the strategy, rather than dealing with the substance of why the decision was made by the General Assembly, which has now reaffirmed that decision 9 times, and will be reaffirming it on the 10th time. Now, with respect to the issue of the nuclear question, you find also that there are attempts within the framework of the resolution that is adopted to water it down, to make it more favorable to the French government. And that's something which I think is, we have to always work against to ensure that the language is clear. We have a number of developments that have taken place just in the last year with the toxic report, with other initiatives that have been undertaken. And of course, this brings to the point that was also raised of the idea of broadening the framework. We must maintain the involvement at the C24, the 4th Committee, and the General Assembly. And at the same time, we also must look clearly at the human rights element of this and the human rights mechanisms, which also have a very important role to play. In fact, in some instances, the human rights mechanisms are taken much more seriously than those in the General Assembly. And I think clearly the General Assembly has not basically said much about the fact that the administering power has refused to participate formally in the United Nations process, although they do participate informally very well through proxy governments, and we can have that discussion at another time. But we have to recognize that this is how that game is played, and we have to always make sure that our statements, as they have been in this 10-year period, very strong, very targeted, very clear. And we have some initiatives now that we can bring to the table. A number of initiatives were brought at the Decolonization Committee a few weeks ago, which adopted the resolution on Maui Nui. The question of French Polynesia is the exact language, and there are some issues there which we can utilize as the basis for moving forward when we go to the 4th Committee. When the statements are made, we have language which we can focus on and present clear and tangible actions that link directly to the resolution, not just the resolution on Maui Nui, but also the resolutions on other territories as well, that there are broader resolutions which affect all territories. So we have a number of things that we can do. And indeed, we have been working, as President Temaru has written to the chair of the C24 on the question of having a decolonization work plan. And that's something which they seem to be not clear on what that actually means, even though it was very well spelled out in the correspondence. But I rather suspect that you have some people behind the scenes that are concerned about this issue of work plan, because then you bring out the democratic deficits associated with the political relationship that they've been very good at keeping below the radar, if you will. So in this context, certainly at the 4th Committee level, we will, as always, make that very clear. There's another possibility that was raised by a number of speakers about, and the work that Nick has been doing over the years is very critical to this, the idea that this is a regional issue. And I heard the comment one of the speakers mentioned about the nuclear ocean, and that hurts me to the core, just the very nature of that thought. But yet there's a need to utilize the links that we have and can develop further with other countries in the region that would be in a position to work together collaboratively to raise the level at the very first part of this discussion about the need to bring it to the higher publicity level. And we can bring together all of the territories and countries that are affected by this and have been affected by this in a common move forward. And certainly we have, we can develop that approach. Certainly even at the United Nations, I'm suggesting, for example, the first committee of the United Nations, which is the Disarmament Committee. They have resolutions on nuclear issues. Everything that relates to the nuclear testing comes to the first committee. So we need to be able also to have our issues addressed there. Unfortunately, they don't have the kind of petitioning process that the fourth committee has. So that's the only drawback. But at the same time, there are ways to do this through side events and what have you. And so we can bring this issue to a broader context. And this idea that was just raised of the decade on nuclear justice, that is a fantastic idea. It also is important to note that in August will be the International Day Against Nuclear Testing, and that's celebrated every year. Normally they have something in September in the context of the General Assembly, because August is pretty a part of the year when there's not much happening. So to give the real to maximize the approach, you want they have something in September, and I think perhaps at the national level in Maui Nui, consideration can be given to, in addition to what is happening now and what will be happening later in July, also a statement with respect to the International Day Against Nuclear Testing, because that links it to the broader context. It links it to the first committee, all of the disarmament issues, which is what this is and continues to be. It is in fact a broader decolonization issue, yes, but it is also a disarmament issue. And when you speak about the issue of the broader framework and the geostrategic element of this, which President Temaru and other speakers have made reference to, this is indeed what we're seeing. The broader context, the coalition being formed against to block China's expansion and all this, and of course the utilization of the Pacific dependencies for that purpose. Guam being a classic example of that. Maui Nui, Kanaki. Okay, you have the facilities there and that are being used for the purpose of moving forward. Even the British are now extending their reach in their post-Brexit environment. So we all of this is part of I think what we are faced with, and certainly we have an opportunity to maintain and collaborate. And I'll just end there. Thank you for the opportunity to just give a briefing, little short briefing on the situation at the UN and broader. We know in October we will have the General Assembly fourth committee will meet. Chances are they will adopt the same text. We have to always be guarded as to attempts to modify it or amend it, and which did take place also in the C-24, but we were able to keep that from happening. Fourth committee, of course, it's rare that the changes are made there, but there has been occasion when they have been made, so we have to be vigilant all the time. And finally, in December, we will have our 10th resolution of the General Assembly. This is sufficient international legal language for us to move forward to these other institutions as well, the Human Rights Committee, Human Rights Council, the initiative ongoing with the ICC, and we can continue onward and forward. With that, kia kaha.
Thank you, Carlyle. I note that we have to carry on to broaden the framework of our political campaign within the UN, and we all know and we have experienced that work in the UN is sometimes fastidious. It's day after day, brick after brick, stone after stone, but hopefully we will have the chance, thanks to your help, to bring this work plan at the right level. Thank you again. I think that Ena is the last speaker on our list, and then we will conclude the panel. I will give the floor to the three more conclusive people who will address, and then we will stop our discussion. Please note that we've been discussing 2 hours and 30 minutes, which is very long. And thank you again for your patience and contribution. Ena, you have the floor. Thank you so much.
Mā'ohi kia koutou e nā koe te mitua. Yorona tātou atoa, kia ora, bula manaka, and hello from here from Aotearoa. Yeah, I would like to share a bit my thought about the political aspect of this. We here, it's just a very small group of Tahitians, and I might be the only one who is carrying the flag for this struggle that we are taking part in. So our movement, if we can call that, is that I'm aligning myself with what Dr. Roden said, is that we're trying to involve the youth and obviously the public opinion into what's happened and what's still happening in Maohi for our struggle. So we have been working with different institutions, especially museums and different organizations, anti-nuclear organizations. I've got a list here of the people that we are trying to get involved with us. And just to mention Oceania Interrupted, we have as well Climate Change, 350.org, Environmental Advocate, Greenpeace, obviously Pacific Green. So the idea behind this is to hammer the French to admit and to recognize what has happened in Maohi. Well, let's not forget that Mongariwa was the first atoll, island, group of islands that have been contaminated by the very first nuclear test in '66. So, we're still there. We don't have time. We have patience. We don't have time. We've been here for the last 55 years. 2 generations. One generation when it stopped in '96. We were still going to fight this because what's happening here around the Pacific, not a lot of our colleagues from those different associations and organizations are quite aware of what's happening what's happening in France, with the meeting of the roundtable organized by Jupiter. By the way, Mr. Macron did say he went to Rwanda to say, just to show you the double standard here, went to Rwanda to ask forgiveness, to confess that they haven't acted. And it's true that it was a genocide, but they are not confessing that they have acted here, deliberately on putting it's killing slowly, a small amount of people, but it's killing them nearly every day. So that is the double standard that we have noticed. And that's the message that we want to hammer away to the French. What we're doing here as well, as I said, working with the different organizations here, we're trying to bring maybe for next year in the curriculum here in New Zealand, because the New Zealand government have decided they're going to try to bring a more cultural, in the cultural impact that have been on the Maori. So they're going to change a bit the curriculum for 2022 or 2023. So what we're trying to do is to prepare a kind of repository and a collection of documentation or meeting like this, and try to pitch it to the Minister of Education and try to have it to show the stand that New Zealand took against the nuclear test, but also against the French coming into the Pacific to carry out their action. So one of the things that I would like us to think about is, how can we here in New Zealand, this small place of New Zealand, have stood against the French? How can we be more active? And one of the things we've been thinking is obviously provide this kind of platform, these kind of discussions between Maohi, because I have to say we don't really know here with all the people that I said earlier, the group that we talked, we don't really know what's happening there and what we are going through. So it would be good. That's why I've been asking Deputy Muay, but also our dear friend Richard, to have a kind of discussion, interviews, which I am a contributor on one of the internet desk, news desk, and I want to put that online, because this is the whole idea of this, is to hammer away the message that France cannot get away with what they've done. So we need to have some statement, we need to have some people, testimonies of people, for us, as I said again, to prepare this collection, this documentation of what's happened there, and hopefully send it into the education system here, whether it's going to be in the primary, secondary, or university, because that's what we're trying to do as well. So as to say that New Zealand has stood along the people of Maohi of the Pacific, just to remind friends that what they've done is illegal, and also to admit liability. So this is what we're doing here. I mean, I'm very passionate because I am one of those Mongolians born during the 66 and just after. I'm sure Father Carlson will remember that. So yeah, we are here. We are here to carry what we can. We can what we can, to carry out the message for Maohi and to help us to be a bit more active here. But obviously we are also prepared, and we are set up for the 18th of July coming. We are set up our group here. We will follow you. We'll be Zooming with you. We hope to be able to Zoom with you, and then to show that we are with you, we are supporting, and this is a solidarity call from us here. It might be just one, but we got some of the people with me carrying this message. We are supporting what you are doing, and it is totally legal and totally free. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ena. Thank you for your contribution. Indeed, we will meet again for the Maohi Lives Matter event on the 17th. Thank you. We will now close the round tables after 2 hours and 36 minutes of intensive discussion. But before I will I would like to give the floor and the final words very quickly to three participants, Moete, Tony, and the President. But before that, I would like to address the panel, the international panel present via Zoom, who are still with us. And again, thank you for your patience. Would there be anybody who would like to precede these three final words? You are free to raise your hand and let us know whether you want to add another very quick contribution.
It's time to close.
I think it's time to close, so I will give the floor quickly to Moete, who maybe will be in a position to comment on the last brief we received from the media regarding the conclusion of the first day of the Table Ronde in Paris. And one of these conclusions is that with a very radiant tone, France has announced that it will déclassify some archives, la déclassification d'un certaines archives. Donc, c'est ce à quoi est arrivée la table ronde élyséenne de ce jour, et on a l'impression un peu qu'elle accouche d'une souris, si c'est uniquement pour annoncer un tel résultat. Moete, you have the floor. Then I give the floor to Tony Geros and to President Temaru to close this round table. Thank you very much.
That's better. Yeah, regarding the outcome of today's roundtable in Paris and the announcement that was made about declassifying some of the archives, that's again, I would say, not very honest, because this has nothing to do with the roundtable. This was already in the pipeline, and that's something that is pending at the Conseil d'État. So, the roundtable that took place today has nothing to do with it. So that's, I would say, quite dishonest to present that as an outcome from the roundtable. But I would like to go back to the, I would say, the political dimension and the political game plan. First of all, I think we cannot emphasize enough the importance of multilateralism. And I come back to the double standard that Anna has raised. You know, we all remember, we all recall Mr. Macron at the United Nations being the champion of multilateralism at a time where Donald Trump was engaging in a totally different, was engaging the US in a totally different kind of politics. And that, you know, love of multilateralism ends where France's interests start. That's a first conclusion that we can make. The second thing I would like to emphasize is we have major players here in the game. I mean, we have the P5s that are, you know, basically all wanting to establish their dominance on the Pacific region. And it's very important to read between the lines, because what's going to be, I would say, the message that's going to be delivered by Emmanuel Macron when he comes, if he comes to Tahiti, will have very little to do with the interest of the Polynesians. In fact, it will have much more to do with the interest for France in the area. And I would like everyone, if you haven't done it already, to read the Macron's speech in New Delhi, because that's where he laid out for the first time his Indo-Pacific strategy. And when you look at it, you know, from that perspective, you cannot but think about what's going to happen in Kanaki in December. Because let's imagine that, and let's hope that our Kanak brothers and the New Caledonians say yes in December to the referendum. Then the only ship that will remain for France in the Pacific area will be French Polynesia, and they're not gonna let it go like that. And you know, that will render any attempt for multilateralism even harder. So you know, that's my 2 cents for concluding this meeting. Thank you, Maruru.
Thank you, Moitei. Thank you for this contribution. I give the floor to Vice President Tony Geros for the final word, and then to President Temaru.
Yorana i tō tātou nei wharerita. I would like to extend all my salutations to all our international guests, and to make short, I will give my thought in French language. Alors, pour ceux qui ne me connaissent pas, je suis président du groupe Tawini Huira'atira à l'Assemblée de Polynésie. Et ce qu'il faut savoir, c'est qu'à l'Assemblée, il y a 3 groupes. Il y a un groupe majoritaire et 2 groupes minoritaires. Et nous sommes un des 2 groupes minoritaires. Lorsque j'ai reçu l'invitation du président du pays de participer au round table qui se tient en ce moment en France, le 14 mai, j'ai voulu comprendre pourquoi d'abord ce round table avait été appelé Tereotika et quel en était son contenu. Et donc je me suis rendu compte en fait que politiquement parlant, à chaque fois qu'on évoque le sujet nucléaire, on essaie toujours d'instrumentaliser les partis politiques à travers leur groupe à l'Assemblée de Polynésie. Donc, c'est ce qui m'a valu de rencontrer mon président du parti politique pour lui en parler. Et nous avons convenu ensemble que les conditions de ce dialogue n'étaient absolument pas réunies, puisque nous savons tous, et la France en premier, que depuis le 17 mai 2013, nous sommes réinscrits à l'Assemblée des Nations Unies. Et donc, en tant que membre réinscrit de la liste des pays à décoloniser, il est nécessaire qu'aujourd'hui, le dialogue entre l'État français et la Polynésie doit se faire dans un contexte onusien, c'est-à-dire doit se faire sous un éclairage et un arbitrage onusien. Et comme le sujet du nucléaire est un sujet éminemment politique, et je dirais même essentiellement politique, puisque c'est le seul sujet en fait où la raison d'État prime surtout. Et c'est d'ailleurs pour ça qu'aujourd'hui le mensonge qu'on dénonce de la part de l'État vis-à-vis des conséquences liées au nucléaire en Polynésie est lié essentiellement à cette raison d'État. Et donc, en discutant avec ma collègue, mon autre collègue, présidente d'un groupement politique au sein de l'Assemblée, mais de la minorité, j'ai d'abord été déçu du fait qu'elle avait accepté de participer aux discussions. Mais je me réjouis aujourd'hui d'apprendre que non, elle ne fait pas partie de la table ronde. Donc finalement, la vraie table ronde, c'est celle que nous tenons en ce moment ici, autour de cette table, avec nos amis de l'international, parce que c'est à travers ce genre de table ronde qu'on peut faire exprimer les sentiments des uns et des autres, et surtout converger vers des réflexions qui vont nous permettre de construire les résolutions de demain par rapport à ce sujet qui est très important et qui impacte non seulement la vie sanitaire en Polynésie, l'économie, la culture et également tout ce qui touche à la vie de tous les jours et qui intéresse les Polynésiens que nous sommes. Alors, Huira'atira, c'est, comme on dit en anglais, the word of truth. Et la seule, ce que je souhaite vraiment, c'est que on essaye de performer en fait cette démarche pour atteindre cet objectif. Et pour atteindre cet objectif, il faut tout dire, il faut bannir le mensonge. Et pour tout dire, il faut permettre effectivement aux Polynésiens de pouvoir accéder à la vérité. Et la vérité, elle se trouve du côté de ceux qui veulent la garder secrète. Et donc, c'est la raison pour laquelle nous également, on dénonce le fait que c'est vrai que dans les années, à la fin de la décennie 90, c'est-à-dire 99, 2000, 2001, on a pu avoir accès à un certain nombre de renseignements déclassifiés. Et grâce à ces renseignements, nous avons pu, avec la présidente Thea Hirschhorn, bâtir un rapport d'enquête sur les conséquences des essais nucléaires en Polynésie. Mais ce rapport d'enquête, malheureusement, il a été bâti par des personnalités politiques qui siégeaient à l'époque. J'étais moi-même à l'époque président de l'Assemblée de Polynésie et on a trouvé plein de choses à l'intérieur. Centaure n'est que l'expression d'un tir qui a été le plus contaminant. Au dire des experts qui ont ensuite récupéré l'information dans le cadre de toxiques. Mais il n'y a pas eu que Centaure. Il y a eu Aldébaran, il y a eu Beltégeuse, il y a eu Rigel, il y a eu Sirius, il y a eu Altaïr et il y a eu Antares, dont le nuage est resté le plus longtemps entre Mahina et Papeete. Le nuage a atteint Mahina le 1er juillet et puis il est passé sur Papeete le 25 juillet. Donc on a eu ça au-dessus de nos têtes pendant près d'un mois. Donc, si avec ça, on ne peut pas avoir des données déclassifiées qui nous permettent d'entériner la véracité du fait que c'est tout le monde qui a été contaminé, à ce moment-là, ben, je donnerai ma langue au chat. Donc, en tous les cas, merci beaucoup pour tous ceux qui ont participé à cette table ronde et merci également à ceux de l'international qui ont bien voulu apporter leur contribution et leur éclairage sur ce sujet Maruru.
Merci Tony. Je pense qu'on atteint maintenant la conclusion de notre table ronde. Et je pense qu'on atteint maintenant la conclusion de notre table ronde. Distinguished guests, we are arriving at the closure of our round table. Thank you for your active participation. I will now give the floor to President Temaru, who will give you the final words, and then we will separate. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much to everyone, people from around the world, from the Pacific, from here. And I would like to say to Vanessa, President of our association, Nuclear Free and Independent Pacific, try to connect, everybody through that association, because that's the goal of those past years, Nuclear Free and Independent Pacific. We all have to focus on that goal. And all together, we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all. And we will now head to a press conference in a few minutes, I think at 2 p.m. And thank you again for your participation. Thank you, Moite. Thank you, Carlisle. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.